Okay, great. Thank you, Petya. Okay, thank you, Petya, and hello to everyone that has joined us today. My name is Moni Kandega. I'm the Regional Director, Eastern and Southern Africa with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And it's an honor to kick us off as we mark International Women's Day. I know there's quite a lot of activities or events that are happening either in our different countries or our different fields this week. And just a reminder that this year's Global Collective mission is focused on inspiring inclusion. And our work at HOT is deeply rooted in the concept or the value of open map data to support disaster response, humanitarian action, and community development worldwide. And that is also built off of the fact that we believe that missing data, particularly missing geospatial geographic data, should not be a reason for any ineffective or limited humanitarian response. But given that, we also acknowledge that there are still a lot of gaps, or there's still varied missing data, missing map data. There's still variations in the kind of skills and tools that are included in collecting data or sharing data or analyzing data that speaks to gender responsive programming. That's a gap that exists, and it exists at national, at regional, and at global level. And the question for all of us this week, or for all of us today, is what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to bridge this gap? Where are we focusing our attention when it comes to bridging the missing maps gap around gender responsive programming? And then the second thing is, a lot of us have struggled, I believe, on this call with what are the parameters for inclusion in our work that is diverse and cross-cutting. And that's because humanitarian crises or development challenges have different impacts on women. They have different impacts on men, on girls, on boys, on people of different, gender, ages, ethnicity, and even social economic status. So there is a responsibility to acknowledge that, but also to bridge that and understand that these differences in impact and being in a place to build programming that speaks to these differences also ensures that the kind of programs that we put out, that the kind of how we allocate our resources, how policies are developed, then can slowly edge towards reducing any gaps or being more effective when it comes to gender responsive programming. So there are lots of advances. The positives, there's a lot of advances in terms of positive developments that we can see. Some of them is reflecting back, for example, in the industry 10 or 15 years, the research was not as detailed as it is now. There's a lot of information on, what indicators, what data sets, what different countries are going through. There's data from all sources. It could be satellite imagery data. It could be data that's collected by a community organization. It could be data that's collected or owned by mobile network providers. There's different data sets that exist out there, or that guide us. Sorry, there's different indicators that guide us on how do we further break down the complexities around what is gender responsive programming. But there's also more areas for improvement, which I believe is what we'll be discussing today and kind of getting into a bit of detail around. The first one being that we're still seeing, as a result of the need to ensure that there is our work is cross-cutting, this what we call intersectionality, etc. Funding that is gender specific still remains limited or challenging for a lot of us. I do believe when I was reflecting on organizations that I have worked in or that have been part of in different capacities, there's still an opportunity for us to get clear on what exactly is our collective theory of change, and how are we validating those theories of change to enhance the design, the monitoring, the evaluation of gender responsive mapping, for example, in the case of humanitarian mapping. There's still opportunity for us to be more specific. What does participation really mean? What does participation in kind of a short-term program? What does participation in long-term programming mean? How does it affect who's part of the conversation? And I think something that we've made progress on and that still needs to continue to be we need to continue to work on is the need to broaden what we mean by gender responsive mapping and inclusion. Obviously, there's been progress. We are no longer looking at it from a single lens or a single stream of thinking, but we are questioning the connection with ethnicity, age, disability, but we still are in a space where, in a lot of instances, even data that's gender disaggregated still remains a challenge for most of us. So today, we have a very vibrant team of panelists that will be talking to us around those issues and connecting them to mapping, map data, and the general open data landscape. But before we get to that, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce and invite us to watch a video message from Holly Branson, who is the Chief Purpose and Vision Officer on the Virgin Leadership Team, Chair of Virgin Unite, also founder and trustee of Big Change. Has co-authored international bestseller book on You Can Find Meaning, Make a Living, and Change the World. And Virgin Unite is one of the partners, groups that's supporting HOT to meet our audacious goal of bridging the missing maps gap to map an area home to 1 billion people that are affected by poverty and that are also at high risk of disaster. So Sima Silenius will just hear Holly's message for International Women's Day, and then we'll take it from there.
I think Marceline were not able to hear it, so maybe share the to restart again and share the audio as well.
Okay, thanks, Petya.
Hi everybody, my name's Holly Branson and I am the very proud chair of Virgin Unite. It sounds like you have a fascinating discussion ahead, so I just wanted to kick things off by acknowledging the significance of International Women's Day. Women contribute to every single part of society, which of course includes technology, data science and open mapping. These fields rarely get the credit they deserve, particularly given the work you do at HOT alone impacts everything from disaster and climate resilience to sustainable cities and communities to public health, displacement and safe migration, and also gender equality. The work that you are doing as women and for women is incredible. For anyone listening who isn't involved in open mapping but wants to be, reach out to the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team because they have some fantastic opportunities. And now on to the webinar. Enjoy and a very happy International Women's Day. Hi everybody. Hi everybody.
Thank you, Holly in absentia, for sharing that message with us. And then next, I'm going to invite our second speaker, who's Karen Betts, working with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data as a Senior Policy Manager, Data Equity and Inclusion. Karen, welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica, and greetings to all of you. It's a real pleasure to be in this forum talking about gender and gender data, but also some of my experiences in this space. As Monica mentioned, I work with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, a network of about 700 organizations that champion the data revolution and was established in 2015. We're very proud of partnering with HOT because HOT was one of our founding champions and members, and always a good partner to work with. So for my intervention today, I'll just want to touch on two things. One, of course, is a few of my experiences working on inclusive data, sort of zooming into gender data. And then I'll touch on intersectionality and why that's important, as well as real-time data, which is what we always do in terms of humanitarian mapping. In front of you, you can see, just go back, please. In front of you can see a few shocking facts. They're shocking to me. I hope they're also shocking to you when it comes to gender facts. And I was, trying to, as I was preparing for this, I was trying to look for some numbers which really send the message home to me why we are so far away from achieving gender equality and why gender equality is an important priority in development. I think the first one for me is, I had it in 2022, and I've never forgotten it, that it's going to take close to 300 years to achieve full gender equality. So by the time we're all gone, we will not have achieved gender equality. But of course, that does not mean that we need to stop. I think what it actually does is it means we need to accelerate our efforts. We need to push ourselves even harder so that we reduce that gap. I think out of those 300 years, the one gender aspect that is most affected is child marriages. So it's going to take about 300 years to end child marriages. And then there are a few others. I think the years for leadership, for example, is less than 300 years. Another fact, and I think this is also very useful for the context of our discussion today, is that fragile states, countries in conflicts, is where you find most gender inequality. So you're talking about Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Chad from the 2022 numbers from UN Women, that's where gender equality is the worst. And for me, the message that it sort of also sends is, for women, displacement isn't even the end of their problems, it's the beginning. This is where now they get exposed to more, access issues, challenges on access, violence, and the like. So really, fragility, displacement, disasters is the beginning of lots of problems for women and girls. The last fact that I have in front of us is just how many women and girls live in conflict-affected contexts. As of 2022, we had 614 million women across the world. I'm sure if we were to disaggregate that to different regions, you'll sort of start seeing the stark inequalities and the realities. And worse off, those numbers are higher by 50% compared to 2017. So you're talking about the war in Ukraine sort of contributing to some of these numbers. So those are my facts. Now I want to turn to you, if you don't mind, in the chat. Are there some shocking gender facts that keep you awake or just shock you to action? It could be numbers you hear regularly. It could be numbers in your communities, the communities you serve, or in your country. It doesn't need to be official numbers. It can also be unofficial numbers. We're not going to verify, but I think we just want to get a discussion around what are some of the things that really shock you when you think about gender inequality, and especially when it comes to numbers. So we'll take about 3 minutes to go into the chat. And there's already that shocking number of 3% of the mappers on OpenStreetMap are women. So for sure, 1% of drone pilots in Philippines are women. Anyone else have a shocking number? The UK opposition party has never been led by a woman. Interesting. And I think as we sort of soak in these shocking numbers as they come through, I think for me, and this is my motivation, has always been, how have we just watched this, just pass in front of our eyes, and how do we change things? And for me, that's part of why I do what I do in terms of trying to contribute to closing those gender gaps, closing gender inequality, and the likes. There's another fact there. India has made significant progress. rising from 135th to 127th. Okay, that's good. So there's improvement, and it's actually good that you're also giving us some positive facts, so that we're not only talking about the negative. Some positive facts are also shocking. I'll just give maybe one more minute to get a few other facts. I see they're coming. They're flowing in now. Less than 20% of OSMF membership comes from the geographic majority, that is Asia, Africa, Oceania, and LAC. Interesting. Climate change disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable, especially women. That's true. And women make up 80% of all refugees and displaced people. And actually, another interesting, talking about, the women making a good chunk of the refugees, I also found out that, and this is, looking at the intersections here, that in as much as women are affected most by different issues, you'll find that older women are affected even more. So if you start disaggregating that or looking at the intersections between age and gender, is when you find that older women above 70, women above 65 are even further excluded from different opportunities. This year, for the first time in her story, 3 out of 7 are women in the OSM Foundation board members. That's good. That's really good progress. So I'll just move to the next slide, just talking about why taking an intersectional lens really helps us to overcome gender barriers, and also why real-time data matters. And just to give, and thanks for colleagues who are still sending in their facts, thank you for that. Just to give a little bit of context, what do we mean by intersectional inequalities or intersecting inequalities? Think about it in a situation where your identity overlaps and therefore makes it worse, or makes you worse off in terms of discrimination or exclusion. Take, for example, you're a woman, you're 20, you live in an arid and semi-arid land in a poor country, and therefore you have no access to school. So you can imagine how those intersecting inequalities can make it harder for you as a person to access opportunities, to access development. And increasingly, as the data for development community, we've been encouraging stakeholders that sometimes data disaggregation is not enough. It's good to look at data from those intersecting inequalities, or you can call it multi-dimensions. Of course, there are needs in terms of what it takes to have true solutions on intersecting inequality. One particular one is that it calls for different organizations to work together. It calls for different data sources to link up. So no longer just useful to rely on official statistics or surveys or censuses, but other data sources give nuance, give flavor to the data, and that includes geospatial data, data that is collected by citizens, big data and the like. So really resolving intersectional inequality needs different organizations to come together, to work together. One other thing that intersectional approaches also helps us to see is that people with lived experience are the experts. They know the issues in their communities. They understand what are the priorities, and they're the best people to communicate what should be done by decision makers. So, for this example, when you have people from the community mapping the issues in their community, they are the best experts. They know the issues, they know the solutions. And once you collect data in real time, it leads to faster decision making. When you combine that intersectional and real-time data, then you have more responsive and more accurate feedback loops, and therefore, faster decision making around improving the lives of people and ensuring that communities and decision makers have that dialogue. I'm really enjoying the facts as they're coming. There's one that just came through on 62% of young women do not stay in the geospatial industry for 10 years. So there's an attrition there, and it's important to, find out what could be the reason why they drop off in, less than 10 years. Just as I wrap up, how do we close gender gaps, and really what should we prioritize? And I think, Monica, you touched on some of this in your remarks. I believe, even if it's going to take 300 years to close gender inequality, I don't think it's a government responsibility only. It takes everyone, including organizations, individuals, households, particularly, because that is where you start solving the problem. So closing gender gaps isn't only a government issue, it takes a whole of society. I think for gender also, data that comes from communities is particularly powerful and useful. And I'm talking about non-official statistics here, data that is either collected through citizen engagement or open mapping. Anything that the community takes the responsibility to collect is quite powerful, and especially on gender. And here's why. Sometimes and often, actually, you'd find gender issues are quite personal. If you've experienced violence in your household, chances are you will not tell the government that you experienced domestic violence. You'll likely tell your neighbor, your friend, or another woman if you're a woman, or another man if you're a man. So gender issues are quite personal, and therefore finding spaces to collect data in a way that people still feel their privacy is considered, their dignity, and who they trust to give that information is really important. And therefore, non-traditional data sources are really helpful to close some of those gaps. And again, comes back to that intersectional approach, that just looking at it from a gender perspective will not always give us the answers we're looking for. We need to look at it from other forms of disaggregation, thinking about disability, geographical location, income, age, and the likes. And as I wrap up, just some parting shots. I have about two parting shots. When you think about data is not a thing you do to people or at people. Data is something you do with people. And I think opportunities, innovations, where data is collected with communities is empowering, because it then gives communities the agency to take action, but also just feeling powerful about having contributed something to their communities. And I think the panelists who will be speaking shortly will be talking from that point of view, that being mappers has empowered them, and they feel that they have a role to play in terms of even shaping their communities. So data gives people power, but we must also recognize that sometimes when data does not exist, people can use it as a weapon, and therefore it gives them power. And here's an example. Take a country like DRC, for example. When was the last time data was collected on maybe in a census or a survey? And for leaders, that effort of collecting data will not be a priority, because it gives them the opportunity to do more harm, to practice things that are not right, foster corruption, foster violence, because we just don't know the numbers. So when data exists, it gives power, and sometimes when data does not exist, it also gives some people power. Something else, and I was mentioning this earlier, is that when you do data with people, that is when you actually engage them meaningfully, and you give them the opportunity to actually shape their communities and to shape decisions that affect their communities. My last parting shot is around data use. When data is not put to use, we really miss the point. And putting data to use is not just, again, a responsibility of government or a responsibility of duty bearers, but it's everyone's responsibility. If you're producing data, how do you put it to use in your context, in your communities, so that data use then does not become someone else's problems, but also our problem. And I think, thinking of it that way will also help us to, know when we need to collect new data and when we need to reuse data and repurpose data. And I think that is the whole spirit and purpose of open data, so that it can be used and reused, so that it does not have to be collected all the time and therefore duplicating efforts. Well, that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening to me and for participating and giving me your facts. I'll now hand back to Petya, I believe, to take us through the next session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen. I think I myself reflected and just noted a few things when we talk about data, doing with people. And that's why I'm very excited that we have some really, really inspiring speakers. Thank you all for typing in the chat. I think keep adding facts, and I'll be facilitating. So my name is Petya Kangalova. I'm part of HOT as a network and engagement lead, and I'll be facilitating this panel discussion. Very inspired and excited to have. We have 3 panelists, so sending some apologies from Lanieta, who's not able to join us today, but I'm sure you can see online a lot of the amazing work that she's doing as part of OSM Fiji. So let me introduce the panelists, and also I'll ask them to maybe switch on their camera so you can all see them. So we have Letwin Pondo, who is joining us from Zimbabwe, and she's the founder of Ladies in Map Zimbabwe. She's a HOT voting member, also community and communication engagements. I think all the women joining us today have so many areas of work and inspiration, and I'm lucky to have met you as well in person, Letwin. So thank you for joining us. Then we're also joined by Dr. Zoe Gardner. Welcome, Zoe, who is teaching fellow in human geography at the University of Leicester, but she has also done some exciting research that I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about, quantifying gender participation and OpenStreetMap. So welcome, Zoe. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're also joined by Ola Akintola, who is a geospatial analyst in open mapping Hub Western and Northern Africa at the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. So welcome, Ola. Thank you again for joining us. So yeah, now we have the people in person. We can switch off the slide. So I have prepared some questions for our panelists. It's very much an open discussion. So we'll have a few questions from me, but I would love afterwards to get some questions from the audience. Feel free to type in the chat as you reflect, as you hear from our speakers, and we can keep that interactive as well. But yeah, welcome. I'm very inspired by all of you in different areas that I've seen your work or I've collaborated with you. So my first question is actually to all of you. It's quite an open question, and I'm sure you will come with different perspectives, but it's truly about how can gender responsive mapping contribute to more inclusive humanitarian efforts. So what are the benefits? How can that be done? Does anyone want to go first, or otherwise I will pick somebody. Big smile, Letwin. Go. Okay. Oh, we have somebody. Ola, go first. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Petya. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Omowonuola, but you can call me Ola. And I'm based in Abuja, Nigeria. I work as the geospatial data analyst for the Open Mapping West and Northern African Hub, and I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. It's very hot here in Nigeria, so in case you see that my face is very wet and like it's really hot. Yeah. But to go to the question that Petya asked, so in my own perspective, I think that contributing gender specific data into the map is one way to look at it. But for me, the way, and I'm sure like either Letwin or Zoe may touch on that, but the way that for me, I think about it is that for everyone that would be affected by an outcome of the processes, it could be like a social process, it could be like an environmental process, where we talk about disaster and climate. That is really important that, the voices of those people, for everyone who will be affected by the outcome, is kind of put into the decision-making process. And the way that I also think that can be done is that the different perspective and different ideas from different groups in the society are kind of put into the way that the delivery of the outcome becomes effective. So as an example, currently we have a project that we're running at the Hub, and it's called like the Strengthening the Gender Against Disaster Response. And so while we're conducting, talking to one of the national coordinators for the project in Sierra Leone, there was one thing she said that really stuck with me, and I don't think I'll ever forget. She said that in her own experience, she has worked with a lot of different women groups in Sierra Leone, and one thing she said is that she has never seen an organization who is, centering women around, disaster resilience. And like the project that she's working on with the Hub is like one of the projects where she's seeing that, women conversations are kind of centered around disaster resilience. And the reason why I think that this is really important is because climate adaptation, climate change is very local, and the way we've also been having this conversation, like different lived experiences exist, different people experience climate, even as women. Because of the places that I've lived, because of the kind of privilege I've had, I've been to university, I've learned about these different things. The way I experience climate will be different from the way that somebody that probably is in the rural community, has never been to a school before, will experience climate. So because this adaptation and the climate conversation is very local, so I think that this is one of the reasons why I really believe that we need to bringing together all of the groups that, like I said, when I said that would be affected by the outcome of these processes into the conversation that we're going to be having. We need to be able to listen to their needs, to the challenges that they face, and be able to put that into how like the adaptation process, the recovery process is kind of implemented. So while I was like, trying to do research and prepare for this, some of the things I thought of was, for example, now, like I already mentioned, for example, if they're trying to do like some adaptation planning, the way we are trying to empower these women for the project that we're working on, we're working with different women groups that we've identified through the national coordinator in Sierra Leone. So currently at this week, we're having like a training with these women to teach them about, disaster. What does disaster even mean? Because some of them don't even know what disaster means. And what does disaster mean? How can you respond to different disasters? How can you use open mapping data and tool to, respond to disaster, plan for disaster? So I think that the way that this can really support is, for example, during the processes where they're trying to plan for how can we implement maybe like adaptation, because of the knowledge that we are kind of empowering them with, it gives them the ability to also be part of those conversations. They can say, yeah, there was one time where I learned about open mapping, open tools, and I know that we can collect data about, this type of information and put them into an open platform. And this can, support the planning for the adaptation. So I think when we kind of build the capacity of women, when we understand the needs and challenges and we do this, we kind of give them the voice to be able to also participate in conversations that are very, very, very relevant to their own needs. So I think for my own perspective, this is why I think like we really need to involve them, and that's why I think it's also very important for the humanitarian efforts that we are engaged in.
Thank you, Ola. I think you've picked up on quite a few things about the voices being heard, the local, like the different experiences, and of course around like climate change and adaptation. I think a lot of topics that we can elaborate on. How about you? Maybe same question, Letwin, next, like from your perspectives, what are the ways in which gender responsive mapping can contribute to more inclusive efforts?
All right, thank you so much, Cynthia. So I'll just speak on like the 3 points that I've just drafted for in response to this question. So the first thing that I'll talk about is like gender responsive mapping contributes to a more inclusive humanitarian response effort in this way. It's like we are particularly focusing on a specific group. We have this particular group that we're talking about. We are focusing on that specifically. And then that particular group belongs to a certain community, right? So let's say, for example, within one community, we have a group of women, we have youths, we have trans, we have all those kind of people. But then we are putting efforts focusing on these different people. We have initiatives that are focusing on women. We have initiatives that will focus on trans. We have initiative focusing on youth. And then by the end of the day, that means we have actually built a whole full active community because everyone has something that is focusing in their line of need. So by this, we are creating a more inclusive and a sustainable community. The other thing that I'll talk about is revealing needs and gaps. Gender in responsive mapping actually pinpoints locations or areas, gray areas, where our efforts as responders need to be concentrated. Because if you look at it, now you're allowing your targeted resources or allocation to that particular area that is the gray spot that we've identified, and you focus usually on that particular group. So which means we are working sustainably and we're working effectively. Then the last thing that I'll talk about is empowering marginalized voices. So with gender responsive mapping, we have those marginalized communities. Some of us actually come from them, but through it, we are like empowering their voices. We are hearing what they say. We are conversing, we are talking to them, and we are addressing the particular need that they are bringing to us as a community. So according to me, I'll just speak on these 3 in addition to what Ola is saying. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leto. And I think we've covered so many different areas. Zoe, what from your perspectives, what are your thoughts? I think you're muted, Zoe, so just yeah. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you.
First of all, can I just say thank you for having me and inviting me to talk on the panel. It might be good if I just talk a little bit about my research first, just to provide some context. The research I've done in the past, so this was around 6 or 7 years ago now, I conducted a survey of OpenStreetMap users, and I was specifically interested in looking at how men and women map differently in terms of the behaviors, when they map, how they map, what kind of data they map, the degree of participation of women at that time, and how that had changed since a previous survey had been done in 2010. So there wasn't much change. So I was interested in specifically in looking at what women do when they contribute to OpenStreetMap. So that was the context of my research. And there's 2 kind of answers to this question as far as it relates to the research that I've done and the work that I've done on this. And firstly, what has come out of 2 analyses that I've done is that women, in terms of what they do, women are much more motivated by altruistic reasons for contributing data to the map. And there were 2 particular studies that I did, and one of which was focused on a small subset of data for the Malawian OpenStreetMap data set. And we looked at the users in our data set and how they had contributed to that particular data set. So we took our broader data set and took a small sample of men and women, and we compared their edits. And we found that was a much greater proportion of, or a much higher participation from women in the hot OpenStreetMap prescriptive tasks. So that told us that women were more active in this kind of this type of contributing to the map. So they were more active in contributing data around trying to contribute to tasks that were somehow humanitarian or had some kind of altruistic value. That was supported by a further analysis that I did of the broader global data set, where we looked specifically at amenity values, and we looked at the types of amenities that women were contributing to, so what they were tagging and how they were editing that. And we found that women were much more active in contributing to amenities like health facilities and public facilities that had some kind of public service or public purpose. So the activity amongst women was much greater in those kind of amenity values. So from this, we drew out that women were more motivated to contribute to the map where there was an altruistic reason, or where there was a kind of humanitarian purpose, where there was some kind of public service, whether that be in cities where people might be looking for health facilities or childcare facilities, or whether that be in disaster response mapping or humanitarian mapping, and mapping data that contributes to those kind of activities. So the research that I've done shows that women are motivated to contribute data to the map where there is some kind of good being done. And that's in contrast to what men do, where we found that men were more motivated by the actual process of mapping, the geometry and the accuracy and the editing of those particular nodes and ways and routes and getting the data correct. Whereas for women, it was much more about just getting these things on the map. So that was important, to look at what women were actually doing, and knowing what women are doing in the map then gives us a reason to then try and promote female participation in the process, because what women do is actually of significant value in terms of the OpenStreetMap project. So yeah, understanding what women are doing in the map helps us then to perhaps develop projects, programs, platforms, incentivization schemes that then encourage female participation in the map, because what women are doing is actually, very important, specifically, especially in terms of things like the Hot OSM project. Okay.
Wonderful, Zoe. I think it's really, thank you so much. And thanks for people keep adding questions. We'll come back to those. I think I was listening to you. It's really interesting when you talked about the motivations, right? Like the aspirations. And that kind of brings me to my next questions that I had for actually for you, Letwin, on the how, right? If we understand maybe better some of the motivations and the understanding. One of the questions that I had, and I know, Letwin, you're involved in so many different activities and organizing, mappers and all that, but what are the strategies or methodologies? I think of strategies of actually involving women, empowering women, marginalized groups. So kind of what advice can you give? What are those strategies to really encourage that inclusivity? And it was really nice to hear as well, like Zoe's research around the kind of motivations and aspirations. So over to you, Letwin.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Persia. So when you're looking at strategies and methodologies that we can adopt to ensure that that gender responsive mapping initiatives are successful. So from the interactions and the involvement in different organizations, Zimbabwe and beyond, the first thing I'll speak to is creating events or initiatives that speak to a particular group. Like Zoe was mentioning during her response, that when we have something that is focused, especially at women, you will see them coming up. They are so eager, they are so excited to contribute to that cause, because that particular initiative is focusing on them and it is rightly directed to them. So they'll feel much more comfortable contributing to it, and they'll be telling you reasons why they feel like contributing. Even when they are busy, they'll just dedicate their time to do that cause. So one thing that we need to do is also is to just effectively identify and respond to the distinct and differential needs, capabilities, and priorities of the different groups that make up our different communities. Then we can also have group like community leaders, of a variety of them. Take, for example, if a community leader is a man, you see, from how they are made, they are actually, most men just think technical and all this maybe sophisticated kind of a thing, whilst maybe sometimes women are just more interested in some funny things, interesting things, colorful things, which sometimes when men plan, they may just, leave out, and they'll think maybe it's not necessary. But maybe that small color that can be added to something will be able to attract females into that. So maybe if we have to adapt leadership strategies that encourage everyone, or have a diverse leadership, like maybe this year we have a female, next year we have a male, or maybe they call it together, that kind of a thing. It will help us achieve this particular goal. And then we can also have like testimonials, or maybe videos, or maybe reports of things that have been done before. Take, for example, our refer to Zoe's research. Now, if it's there, if we can read about it, if we can see how things were going down there. Some people are just motivated through reading what has been done before. Because when you come to someone and you tell them, I was talking to this other group during one of the community engagement talks, and I was telling them, no, she was telling me, I cannot lead Latrine. I cannot do that because, I'm a woman, and they are men. Maybe you should reach out to the men. They can sort this out thing. But I was telling her, no, you can do this. Then she asked me, give me one example of a lady who you have ever seen leading a community. And then I referred her to one. I have Rebecca from OSM Rwanda. She's a wonderful community leader, and she's doing amazing work. So now when you refer them to someone who is actually doing it, or maybe give them something to read about women doing it, and then now they are motivated, and they feel, okay, so someone is doing it, then I can do it too. So we might need something like that. And then another thing is to support the already existing groups that are focusing on gender responsive mapping. We have female, lots of them, I think, in OSM right now, that focus, that like female focused groups within OSM or within HOT. I don't know what different needs they have, but I think if we could figure out this community needs this one needs this ones need this, and we support them at their needs, it may also encourage other women when they see them getting support, when they see them maybe getting featured, getting highlighted, and that kind of a thing. It will motivate one woman or one other person that if someone of this particular nature like me is getting this kind of support, I can also do it. And I also need to get that kind of recognition or whatever will do that for them. And then in that aspect, I also wanted to talk about the female focus group, also highlighting that, for example, Ladies in Map Zimbabwe, this was also formed as an inspiration from Call to Map, from Joletta's PH. So, we saw other women doing it, and they're like, if other women are doing it, why can't we? Let's just try it, but in the Zimbabwean way. So just that it motivates different people. And then also when carrying out events, I think I saw one comment in the chat, when carrying out events or trainings or what, I think we should also make sure that our panels, our speakers, our data collection teams, they are also gender balanced or they are diverse. Given also an example from Zimbabwe, when we had the anticipatory response program in Mzarabani, we had our data collection teams. We had one team that had 3 males. I can't remember what happened there, but when they went out to collect data, when they tried talking to the local people, they were asking them, why are you coming to us as men only? Like, how can we trust you? Like, you're just men showing up here and you're telling us you want to collect data, you want us to give you information. Why can't we have a woman within it? Why can't we have like a youth or something so that we understand that it's already, it's real, you know? So those simple things that we might think, they're not important. Some of the people really consider them. Like, we have our teams mixed up. We have a male, we have a female, we have a youth, we have this, we have this. By the end of the day, when they approach the communities understand them better than having things that are not. And then the other thing is also looking at multilingual approaches. I'll also give a shout out to OSM Swahili from Tanzania. They do their activities in their local language. They carry out their initiatives in their local language. This actually empowers them. You know, they do so much, but they're using their own local language. They are still within the line of everything that we are doing, just that they saw that there is need for them to just divert from the common English that most communities are using. Let's just use our local language and just see the amazing work that they are doing from Tanzania. And then we can also work on partnerships with different organizations around. Some of them that focus on maybe advocacy groups or organizations representing marginalized communities. This can just provide valuable insight, ensure that our projects or initiatives, they really remain inclusive because we're getting insights from them. We're getting feedback from first-hand people who work with these groups and understand them better. So with this, I would think in summary, this can help address the methodologies we can adopt as humanitarian organizations to address this. Thank you so much, Patty.
Wow, Letwin, I think so many actually examples and like specific things that people can like look into. I would mention the one you talked about, leaders. I would say all of you here on this pad are amazing, leading by example, you know, be used as an inspiration. I would also call on all the participants to think about, you know, all the leaders, or to recognize. I love the like community working group, HOTS community working group shout outs as well. So really, I think, you know, promoting or kind of talking about amazing like female leaders in the community. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, Letwin. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to ask maybe one more question to you, Zoe and Ola, and then I saw a few in the chat and then go from there. But again, I think in this section, we're really talking about the how, like the different approaches. So Zoe, again, over to you in the context of like thinking of research and all the work that you talked about. Can you give us some advice on how can the type of research you do or others do support the inclusion of more women in OpenStreetMap?
Okay, well, I'll just mention a couple of things that have come out of my research. One is more anecdotal, that I've picked up in discussions with female mappers or mappers who don't identify as male. And one of that is this issue around hostility in online environments, and I have been on the receiving end of that myself. So think about the OpenStreetMap community, they're very protective of what they do, they're very protective of the data that they create, and they're very suspicious of I mean, this is what I experienced when I was conducting the survey. They were very concerned and very suspicious of my motives and very protective of the work that they were doing. And there's an issue amongst online communities towards mappers who certain groups of people feel are insufficiently qualified to contribute to the map. And kind of, you know, so that does affect, you know, the way that people contribute, what people contribute, and certainly people can be deterred from contributing to the map when on the receiving end of that kind of challenge and hostility. So it's important, if we want to encourage female mappers because of the very important work that they do and the important ways in which they contribute to the map, that these inclusive environments are created. So there's a kind of platform issue there, and there's a kind of interface issue around people feeling safe to make those contributions in a kind of inclusive way, in a safe way of doing that online. And interestingly, and this is backed up by my research, what I found was that, you know, which is, you know, quite a nice piece, a nice finding for women, is that often the women that were contributing to the map were much more highly educated than, you know, this is a general trend, but the women that were contributing were often much more highly educated than their male counterparts. So I took that to mean that women felt that they needed to have this degree of education to give them that confidence to contribute to the map in a way that men did not necessarily, in a way that wasn't the same for men. So men, you know, it's about this relationship between gender and technology. I mean, that's my kind of broader research interests. I'm a kind of human geographer, and I kind of interested, which is how I got interested in looking at the kind of human dimensions of OpenStreetMap. So, you know, just to kind of, I thought that was quite a nice piece of data to say, actually, the women that are participating, they really know what they're doing. You know, they're often highly educated, and so actually what they're contributing is probably, you know, reliable data. So, you know, that just kind of is there to kind of say, actually, you know, we do know what we're doing. I mean, not me specifically, because I'm not a mapper, but the women that are participating are, you know, doing so for good reasons and with the right kind of qualifications behind them. So it's really important that, you know, women are encouraged to participate in this process because of the work that they do. So in terms of, you know, what we can do to encourage that kind of inclusivity, it's about looking at motivation, looking at when women map, how they map, what the challenges are to mapping, why women stop mapping. So that's all. That's the kind of research that have been involved in and hope to kind of carry on doing, to then contribute to then encouraging women to kind of keep mapping, and creating these online platforms that women want to participate through. So it's about the platform, it's about the interface, it's about the right kind of motivation, it's about women participating at times when they can participate, because a big part of women's lives obviously is caring responsibilities, and research has shown that that's a big challenge to female participation and women dropping out of the process as well. So my research is all about, you know, trying to understand what women do and why they do it, and trying to create mechanisms to support that activity.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And I think Arnali shared a link to some of your research. And, for those of you who haven't looked at that, you can also take a look. I have one question for you, Ola, and then I'm going to read through some of the questions from the chat. And I think the question is nice transition also. Zoe, you talk about the inclusive environment, which is really important from platform. So Ola, I know you work a lot with data every single day. So my question, which I think is also really important, is thinking again of the how, but how do organizations address this ethical and privacy concern? We talk about safety as well, associated with collecting gender disaggregated data.
Thank you so much, Petia, for that. So I know, we'll be talking about data collection around women's specific needs, but then it's really important to consider the local context for me. I think that's very, very important, because what might be the norm in a particular society or culture might not be norm in another society or culture. So I think that's where the talk around participatory mapping comes in. That when we are going to be collecting information or data about women, we kind of ensure that the local communities that are based in the specific area of interest that we are going to be collecting that information around, they're kind of involved in the process of, the data collection planning and, also designing the data model, also to ensure that information that are collected, especially when you talk about open data, when you collect the data and then you make them open, that means a lot of people have access to those data. So it's very important that we put into context the local situations, the local norms, the culture of the particular area that we are going to be collecting the information about. So at ORT, we are really, we always talk about ensuring that the data we collected does not cause harm to the people that we are collecting the data about, because, it's something that and I would say that this was also something that I learned, in the process. I remember there was one time when we wanted to collect information about safe spaces for women, and when we did research and we discovered that based on the local context of the area that we were going to collect that information for, it would really put the women at risk, because if we collect data about safe spaces, so safe spaces would be places where women that have been maybe violated are put, just to take them away from the people that may be abusing them. So you imagine collecting that information and putting that on the map, that kind of put them in more danger, because it exposes that information and more people can see that data. So I would say that it's really important, like I said, that when we are going to be talking about data collection, especially when it comes to putting the needs of women on the map, we should really put into consideration the local context. So there's actually a data ethic framework that ORT has developed to kind of support with this kind of data collection. So there's an sheet-based tool that kind of walk you through what are the things you consider, what are the risks involved in your area of interest, and what are the plans that you think you can put in place to mitigate those risks. And when you then use this sheet-based tool, then it can then inform your organization whether you want to proceed with the data collection or not, based on the risk that you've identified for the data collection process. I'll also mention another example that I've also experience is collecting information about health. Sometimes when you go on the field, some health facilities are they engage in family planning processes, and there are some communities or social contexts where this family planning is really not considered a good thing. So when you collect those information, you don't put them on the map, because you put the health facility in kind of danger, because in their own local context, in their own local society or cultural norm, is not something that should be done. So I would say that as much as we are really having this conversation, and I've also seen cases where a lot of people are very excited about, we're going on the field to collect information and collect data and put them on the map, but then they don't think about the danger that might come from putting those information on the map. So I would say that is really important that we consider this kind of safety and privacy and ethics around data collection, and ensure that for all of the data collection process that we might engage in, we kind of think about how we want to approach it.
Thank you so much, Ola. And yeah, local context. Also have 10 minutes already for what you've shared with us. So we have one question. I might try to combine actually two because they're related. So we've been asked, Halima's asked, what advice can we give to young new mappers to inspire women in geospatial from marginalized communities? And that kind of links to actually Liz's last question of like, is there a high barrier for entry for women? You know, thinking of the inspiring, but also what do you think about the barrier to entry and what can we do to lower that barrier if there is?
Okay, I think for me, yeah, I mean, this really interests me. So I think that the way I think about it is, like I will always say, context is really important. We really sometimes we need to be very aware of our own privileges. And that comes into the intersectionality part as well. For me, like I said, I grew up in a very local area, and I kind of experienced women, you know, in those local areas, and I know the kind of, capacity that they have. I know what they are capable of doing. So I would say that, yeah, there's really that barrier. For me, and the way I look about it is from the technical aspect, because when we talk about open data, open mapping, there's a technical component. And so when we say that we want women to contribute, what do we exactly mean? Do we mean that, you know, we want them to be able to put data on the map, use all the tools that we have, open mapping tools and open data tools, and put those data on the map? Or are there other ways outside of the technical parts that, you know, we expect them to contribute? For me, these are questions that I ask myself, like, how can we engage? How do we engage people? Because we need to be very sincere that not everybody can be technical. I mean, that's something that we need to be very sincere of. Not every woman would have the capacity to learn and be able to contribute, using open mapping tools and open data tools. So how do we ensure that? Are there other ways that they can contribute to this mapping community without necessarily being able to use the tools that we have? So for me, I feel like I think if we need to start like asking those questions, I'm really answering those questions. And I think that once we start to really think about that, then I would say that we can reduce the barrier because it's a lot. But apart from being a woman, there are other challenges from the places where I grew up. Women are not allowed to work. They are not considered, to even participate in any conversation that does not, that is not family, taking care of the children and being at home. So I just think like we really need to look at it at a very general scale, and we really need to involve a lot of different groups, a lot of different contexts, a lot of different perspectives, and it means like going into the local places. Because I think that sometimes when we say we want to involve women, we just look at people who have access to the internet, and we can see, like Letwin was saying, that also there's this Map Zimbabwe that's contributing data to OpenStreetMap. Oh, I'm in Nigeria and I can create my own community and I can contribute as well. But then we need to look beyond that. Some people don't even have access to internet. Some people don't even know that this open mapping word exists. So when we say that we need to involve women, what do we really mean? Like, what do we really mean? I think we need to kind of have like that kind of general global conversation of what does it really mean and what type of women are we including, and how can we also ensure that we include everybody into the conversation. I mean, for me, that's always the question that I always think about and I always ask myself. So about you, Pet.
Did we I think you picked up also on technology that we didn't talk a lot about. And I think on the inspiration, I feel like Letwin already gave us some inspiring kind of advice, but I'm sure you can also directly follow up. I had one again, maybe Zoya or Letwin, a question from Arnali actually on the difference between using the female term and the women term. I don't know if anyone would want to pick up on that. And then I'll maybe kind of close up because I know we're nearly close to time for Monica.
Yeah, that's if I can pick up on that one, it's quite a tricky question, and I did get picked up on this in when I did my research, because when I asked people to kind of nominate their gender in the survey, I simply put men or women, you know, man or woman. And this was back in 2017 when I did the survey, and that was a real failure to not recognize, you know, the kind of gamut of kind of gender identity that is, you know, rightly kind of recognized. And I guess it's a kind of sensibility more than a gender issue. You know, a female, I mean, I don't use female and women, you know, they're kind of, you know, I don't use those in a way that is that distinguishes between those things, but it more than it being about actual, you know, sex, or it is more about kind of the female sensibility, or the you know, identifying as women, and you know, there are kind of motivations and issues around that. So yeah, that's, I don't really think there is a difference really between saying female or women. It's to me, in terms of the kind of research that I do, at least, it's about identifying the sensibility that is the marker.
Yeah. Thank you. So, you know, when I read the question, I was like, I'm not sure what's the best answer and how that's, but I think picking up on this. We're nearly up to time, and I don't know if there's anyone, if you want to give one final thought, one final kind of advice. We want to talk about, you know, long-term sustaining those, but maybe just one final sentence that you want to call on to the audience, and then I give over to Monica, all of us who joined us today. Maybe Zoe, do you want to go first?
Well, I mean, I did write some answers down to the previous question, actually, around, you know, accessibility. And for me, it's quite a broad issue around, and it's, you know, I think from my perspective, it's about really looking at this relationship between women and technology, what used to be called kind of ICT. But I wonder now, with the kind of digitization of life generally, how that will impact on that relationship. And you know, I was having some real technical difficulties earlier in trying to access things. I just didn't want to deal with it, because I'm not interested. But we have to. But I think my brain certainly is not wired in a, you know, it's not what motivates me. It's not what kind of, I'm not into that kind of technical nitty gritty. So I think I'm interested in that relationship and how we work with that to encourage participation. And, you know, because as digital sensors, which we all are, we have so much geospatial knowledge, and it's about just making that knowledge available for things like, you know, humanitarian purposes. So yeah, that's
thank you.
I hope that's interesting, helpful.
Yeah, good. Anything else, Letwin or Ola, from you on kind of closing up?
Okay, thank you so much. In closing up, maybe I would say a diverse leadership will facilitate the continuous sustained efforts as the leaders know exactly what speaks to them and the group they actually represent. So in this, we're just building local capacity. And I'll also maybe urge us as attendees and everyone representing maybe a community or an organization here, that maybe we might need to develop clear guidelines and protocols that speak to this issue, and also maybe integrate gender consideration into our existing policies, constitutions, or whatever documentations you have within your organizations. You can also include it in your strategic plans, just, you know, and then maybe lastly, it's not a suggestion, it's just something that I picked from one of the calls. Someone was actually asking if we could have like gender focal points. Like I will not explain a whole lot about the conversation, but they're asking me, why don't we have something like that within our communities? Because even if we have leaderships, sometimes, you know, it's difficult to be maintaining communities that you're not part of, for example, or what cannot come down and maintain every community that we have all around the globe. But the people are responsible. And then when they are responsible, maybe they're not, one thing is not really changing around the community and it's relating to gender. Why don't we place maybe gender focal points that make sure that whatever happens within the organization, there's that aspect of inclusivity, there's that aspect of diversity, and there's that aspect of gender. So it's just food for thought. Thank you so much.
ideas. Thank you, Letwin. Ola, maybe 30 seconds. So sorry, because we're really up to time.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like the place for this, but I think as a final note, I would say like it's also important to kind of build awareness within the on this, because I know like I remember there was one time when I was reading an OSM, not like OSM diary, but somebody was collecting information about, you know, the challenges that women who are contributing to OSM are facing. And then there was one particular individual who kept saying that, you know, OSM is so open, and, you know, how do women have challenges? It's open, anyone can contribute. So why are we like, as they need to gather research on what issues women are facing? So I'd say that maybe awareness is also very important. I think like a lot of other people, maybe other gender, I don't know if that's okay to say, are not kind of aware of why these conversations are very important. So maybe if we can also think of how to engage them to ensure that they also know that this is not saying that, you know, one gender is more important. This is just to say that, you know, there's been research and there's been gaps that have been identified, and then we're just trying to look for ways to ensure that we fill these gaps. From the research that Zoya said, like even from what Annalie dropped in the chat, 30% of women are contributing to OSM, and so you're just trying to understand why is this happening, are there like challenges they're facing, and all of that. So I think we just need to like bring more awareness into this conversation.
Thank you so much, Letwin, Zoe, Ola. Thank you, huge thanks to Karen as well. So over to you, Monica, for the final wrap up. Thank you everyone for staying a few minutes as well at the end, but I really appreciate you all, and thank you for bringing your perspectives, your advice to everyone. Over to you, Monica. Thank you again.
Yes, so thank you to our panelists, thank you to our speakers. I'll wrap this up by just echoing some key points or some highlights that I've gathered from our speakers today. And the first one that was really clear from Beth's keynotes was us embracing the variation of data, whether that's official or non-official data, but also understanding what our collective responsibility is in closing the gender gaps data and the role of individuals and institutions. And I think that builds on to, even if it's non-official data, is it speaking to an existing kind of what we call a use case? Is it speaking to an existing business case? Is it relevant to a social or economic component that our citizens relate to? And then the second thing was around we talk a lot about ensuring that missing maps are not a hindrance to humanitarian services or development or support services. But then the other thing we don't talk a lot about is that having missing maps is actually empowering the wrong people. And a lot of times we'll have the conversations around do no harm when we have the data, but we're not having the conversation of when there is no data, what kind of harm actually exists in that environment. And we've seen variations of this. One of them is around what Omo was talking about. Gender-specific threats or misinformation are used where we don't have any data is used to silence, for example, female leaders. And it could be community leaders, it could be climate activists, it could be environmental activists, it could be, you know, political activists for that matter. So there's an actual conversation on our purpose for closing the gap on data is to avert some of those threats or misinformation that come about. And then we had a lot from Zoe again and Lotwin on the future of mapping and what promotes female participation, the motivations for women to map. And unless we address this, if those motivations are inherently driven by a context that's outside of a particular agenda that we are looking to work with, or they're outside a particular issue addressing disability.
Sorry, I think Monica's muted. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I was speaking about the motivations for women to map. What's motivating people to map, and how are we future-proofing, future mapping, promoting more female participation? How are we addressing capabilities around mapping? Because that's a very tangible thing that has to do with skills and knowledge. When we are having mapping convenings, mapping events, literally what skills are we transferring, and who's in the room, and how are we looking at, if we're using a mobile to support mapping, who owns mobile phones in a household? So there's that conversation. And then there's the final discussion around questions of openness of data, the platforms that we're using, the interface issues that we're having, a lot around open source platforms, which spans into ownership, expanding that. And this year's theme is around inclusion, but I want to challenge all of us to ask ourselves, how are we promoting inclusion, starting with participation? Is it intentional? Is it, are we having new faces? Are we having, you know, kind of new conversations, or are actually very relevant, important conversations? And just to wrap up that, some of the barriers to participation, I think this was mentioned by Omo, is an assumption that everyone is online, and we've all established not everyone is online, and not everyone is using kind of the same platforms. Not everyone is communicating in the same tools and processes that we're using. So I'm hoping that in our individual capacity, as implementers, as leaders, as the authorities, as researchers, then we're able to integrate all these ideas into our day-to-day programming in order to shift that gap that currently exists. So thank you, everyone. I want to echo Petia's her sentiments. Thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this discussion. We're always moving an inch closer to the 300 years that Bet talked about. It seems far, but we are part of that journey. And wish everyone a good day.
Thank you all.